Okay, the next challenge that our friend Jim has given against the Bible, against the Torah, is where he quotes Leviticus 21:20 states that I may not approach the altar of God if I have a defect in my sight. I have to admit that I wear reading glasses. So does my vision have to be 20/20, or is there some wiggle room here? So what on earth is he talking about? That you need to have no defect in your sight to approach the altar of God. What's the altar of God? And why can't you approach it if you have a defect in your sight? So this is an example of a pure mistranslation and taking out of context completely. And by the way, if somebody's attack against you has to be based on a misquote or a blatant mistranslation of something, that itself shows a very weakness in the argument. That you're just trying to ruffle up the feathers here, but there's no basis. There's nothing to it.
No substance in the attack.
Right. If you can only come up with such a thing, so then, if you can't do better, where are you coming from? This one, if you just look it up, if you simply look up Leviticus 21:20, what is it speaking about there? Any guess? Korbanos. Yeah. What about them? What is a defect in your sight? What's that to do with sacrifices? Correct. A blemish in a kohen, a priest. That the people who are the Kohanim, the priestly tribe, who are serving in the temple, if they are blemished with certain particular blemishes, then they cannot approach the altar of God, meaning they cannot serve in the temple.
The eyebrows.
So that's what it's talking about first of all. So it's not talking about this guy, it's talking about Kohanim serving in the temple. The altar of God, I think what he was trying to make it sound like, for a Christian, let's say, the altar of God means church. And so if you've got imperfect vision, you can't go to church. That was the twist he was trying to put on it. It's talking about the temple in Jerusalem, it's talking about the Kohanim, the priests, and it doesn't say anything about imperfect vision there. It does indeed go through some of the particular blemishes, but none of them are about vision.
Is some of them with the eyebrows?
One of them is if he has extremely long eyebrows. Another one is if he has a growth in his eye. Something something that's actually in the eye, or growing over the eye, but it doesn't say anything about bad eyesight or 20/20 vision. So that's just really taken out of context. Nevertheless, we could still say, if you're going to quote something, why misquote it? Just quote what it really says. What it really says is weird enough that somebody who is from the priestly tribe, but because they got long eyebrows, they can't serve in the temple. Here the truth is better than the lie in a way. It's bizarre. The poor guy, just because he has huge long eyebrows, some people have bushy eyebrows. Is this somehow a reflection of a lack in that person? Is that a moral defect because you have bushy eyebrows? That was a part of the inauguration of them, but then they grew back. Yeah. So we have to still explain, even though Jim's misquote of this doesn't need to be explained, but the real quote does need to be explained. Why indeed would the Torah limit somebody from serving in the temple simply because they have bushy eyebrows or growth on their eye or any other such blemish? So this itself is dealt with by our commentaries, who explain, particularly Maimonides, Rambam, in Moreh Nevuchim, in the Guide to the Perplexed, also in Sefer Chinuch, which is a guide to the meaning behind the mitzvahs. It's explained that the role of the Kohanim and the entire temple service was one that was on display, that people would watch it and through it be inspired. And so therefore, Maimonides explains that the temple had to be in pristine condition, and those serving in the temple also had to be physically, externally presentable. And so if a Kohen would have a blemish, specifically a blemish that is completely superficial, not talking about bad eyesight, but bad eyes, that something's growing on his eyes or he's got bushy eyebrows, something that would make him unusual and would distract from the temple service, that's what made him invalidated. And the reason Maimonides gives for that is because people watching, if the Kohen has an appearance that is a bit unusual or bizarre, it will lessen the respect and honor people will have for the temple and the temple service. And so, therefore, specifically, an external, superficial blemish is what validates a kohen. Nothing internal. It's no indication of him being any lesser a kohen or any lesser person. It's simply that it will diminish the respect of the temple service in people's eyes. It's taken a step further by the Sefer Chinuch, which is the book of education, explaining the deeper meaning behind some of the mitzvahs, where he says that it's more than that. It's not just that people will have less respect for the temple service. One of the main things about the temple service, which we don't appreciate because we're never there, is that the entire service was an inspiration for meditation. The people would watch the Kohen do his various moves in bringing the sacrifices and doing the various work in the temple, and by watching it, every move had symbolic meaning. It symbolized something. Like we discussed when we spoke about sacrifices themselves, that the sacrifice represented the animal soul being brought up on the altar of God. So to all the moves and the maneuvers and the movements of the Kohen, everything he did was symbolizing something. And we've lost this tradition, we've never seen it, that people knew to watch the Kohen and to think about certain things, to meditate on something based on what the Kohen was doing. The Kohen represented something, the fire represented something, the animal represented something, and the way he lifted and moved and slaughtered and everything he did had symbolism and meaning. And watching the process was itself a meditation. And so the Sefer Chinuch mentions that if the Kohen would have some feature about him that made him unusual, it would distract from the meditation. It would be hard to focus. People, instead of watching and thinking the right thoughts, they'd be saying, "Look at that guy's eyebrows," and that would lose it. And Maimonides, when he says this, says that this is because of the failing of the human being. We are superficial beings, and we do notice these externalities. And so, in order that should not distract from the temple service, we're told that the Kohen has to be somebody who externally just has nothing unusual about him.
So why does the Torah then specify certain things? Long eyebrows.
Okay.
What if the guy was obese?
Right.
What if,
So
so
that's a good question. That is explained by another commentary called the Kli Yakar, who he goes through the various particular blemishes and shows that each one symbolizes something particular that is distracting.
Oh.
There's a particular thing for each one. Or on a deeper level, some of the Hasidic commentaries say that in actual fact, these particular blemishes were a sign from God that Kohen was not valid to be a Kohen. Because the priestly honor was something that was just inherited. You were born into the family, and anyone born into the priestly family could serve in the temple. So what if there was somebody who deep down was not really appropriate to serve in the temple? What about that person? What are we going to do with them? So how do we know? You're going to test them. There's no injection you can give them to find out what's inside them. You don't know. So therefore, the Torah says that God, who created these people, will create the ones that are invalid. They will develop a particular blemish, and these blemishes, only these and no other, is a sign that Kohen shouldn't serve in the temple.
Wow.
This idea is taken even further by the Tzemach Tzedek of Chabad, the third Rebbe of Chabad, who says that you might think that therefore a Kohen who has a blemish is somehow a lesser priest, a lesser Kohen than one who doesn't have a blemish. Why? Because the Kohen who is unblemished serves in the temple. The one with a blemish is not allowed in the temple. It says the Tzemach Tzedek, no. It's a sign that he has a different type of soul. There are some Kohanim who their job is to connect to holiness within the temple. There are other Kohanim, the priests, who their job is to stay outside of the temple and bring holiness there, outside of the temple. And so therefore a Kohen who had a blemish, his job was to work out of the temple as a Kohen, as a person who would inspire and lift up the spiritual state of the Jewish people, but not inside the temple, on the outside. And the indication that he had that type of soul was the external blemish that invalidated him from priestly duties in the temple, but to be a Kohen outside the temple. So it wasn't even an insult to him. It could even be that he had a stronger, more powerful soul. Because to bring holiness in the temple is one thing, but to bring holiness outside the temple is even more powerful. And only those particular blemishes are the sign of that, and no other.
But the